Okay, so today is May 29th, 2010, right? Okay, we start. Is this working all right? Okay, we start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, we come back now to Sutta number 26 in the Majjhima Nikāya. And we are at page 260, and this will be paragraph number 19. And if you remember, 2 classes ago, we dealt with the enlightenment of the Buddha as explained in this sutta, which is stated very simply, stated very simply, very concisely. This would be in the previous paragraph on page 259. He says here, very simply, being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, seeking the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana, I attain the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Same thing with aging, sickness, death, sorrow and defilement. So seeking the undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana, I attain the undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Then the knowledge and vision arose in me, my deliverance is unshakable, this is my last birth, now there is no renewal of being, no more renewed existence. So at that point, we took a detour into Sutta number 36, in which the Buddha explains more precisely what took place on his quest for enlightenment after finding this delightful spot in Uruvela. According to that sutta, he began to practice these extreme ascetic practices, carrying them on to the point where he almost died. Then he realized that the ascetic practices are not useful. He thinks, is there another way to enlightenment? He remembers this incident that took place in his childhood when he entered into the meditative state, the first jhana. Then he thought that must be the way to enlightenment. Then he gave up the ascetic practices, began taking food, normal food, until he regained his physical strength. Then he enters into the 4 jhanas. Then he develops the 3 higher knowledges, the recollection of past lives, the knowledge of passing away and rebirth of beings, and the knowledge of the destruction of defilements. And then that brings the liberation of the mind. Okay, so we have these 2 different perspectives on the enlightenment. And now we come back from Sutta number 36 to Sutta number 26, where the Buddha is still sitting in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, And now he's going to sort of review or recollect his experience of enlightenment, and then it's a sort of, what do I do now? I had a friend who summarized very concisely what is the difference between an arahant and a bodhisattva. An arahant is always thinking, what do I do now? And the bodhisattva is always thinking, what do I do next? Okay, so now the Buddha is reviewing his realization, his attainment. So he says, I considered this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, by mere logic. Taka vacharo, literally it's outside the range of reasoning, rationalism. It's subtle and pandita vedaniyo. It's to be experienced by the wise, to be realized by the wise. Okay, so this is a kind of review of the Dhamma that he has attained. Mayang Dhammo adigato. Okay, now you can see he's starting to think about the possibility of teaching others, because now his mind turns from the Dhamma that he's realized and it looks out upon sentient beings. And then he sees that, he says, this generation, so maybe better, usually generation, nowadays we used to speak about the beat generation, the lost generation, Generation X. What is the current generation? Y. Letter Y or? Me? Oh, that was in the 1980s. Okay, but the word used here in Pali, it's paja, would maybe better be rendered population. In fact, that's what I use now. This population. Then we have an expression that's a little bit hard to translate very exactly into English. Here I render it delights in attachment. But the word that's used here in Pali is alaya. Which has several implications or sort of dimensions of meaning. On the one hand, alaya can indicate the subjective act of clinging, adherence. And also it suggests that which one clings to, the objects of clinging. And also the word suggests something like the lair of an animal, like the den of an animal. So that it's a place that one repeatedly goes back to, maybe seeking safety and security. The place that's familiar, the place where one feels at home. And so you could say that from the Buddha's perspective here, this population, that means especially the human population, in other words, us, delights in clinging to things, in the objects of clinging, and we're so settled into our homes, our familiar territories, that it's hard for us to break out and to look at things from a different point of view, especially a point of view that will ask us to give up our clinging. So this population delights in attachment, takes delight in attachment, rejoices in attachment. And now, this is a very important statement because this is going to show us what the Buddha realized through his enlightenment. He says, and what is that Dhamma that the Buddha just referred to in the previous sentence? The Dhamma that's profound, hard to see, and hard to understand. Here we see that this Dharma has two aspects to it. First aspect, he says, it is hard for such a population to see this truth or this principle, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination. So this first aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment is paticca samuppada, dependent origination, and it's also called here, I render it, I think following Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, specific conditionality. And in Pali, it's in Pali, it's called idapachayata, which this is a compound. It's made up of a prefix idang, which simply means this. Pachaya means condition, and the ta at the end turns it into an abstract noun, something like the English word nis or ship or hood. Or ITY, in fact. And so this is, in a way, it's a shorthand expression for the formula that we meet with sometimes in the text, imas upa idang sati, imasmin sati, idang hoti, imas upada, idang upajati. That is, when X exists, Y comes to be. Through the arising of X, Y arises. So it means that one thing originates through something specific as its condition. And in a way, this is like a compressed term that incorporates the whole 12-fold formula of dependent origination, with ignorance as condition, the volitional activities originate. With the volitional activities as condition, consciousness originates, and so on, all the ways down. With birth as condition, there is old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So dependent origination, specific conditionality, they're two terms for the same thing, this phenomena or this principle of phenomena arising in dependence on conditions. And those conditions, in turn, originate through other factors as their conditions. And those other factors originate with still other factors as their conditions. And so we have this whole series, or better, a whole network of phenomena originating through their specific conditions. Is my voice carrying to the back?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, so we could say that is one part of the Buddha's realization. Then the other part, the counterpart to this, is indicated by the next sentence. He says, and it is hard to see this truth or this principle, namely the stilling or quieting down of all formations, all volitional formations, all volitional activities, the relinquishing or giving up of all acquisitions, everything that we acquire and hold to has to be relinquished and given up. The destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nirvana. So that is the other side. So we have, on the one hand, that principle that lies behind the continuation of the cycle of samsara, the round of birth and death, and that is dependent origination, phenomena originating dependent on other phenomena. Now in the Sutta number 36, we saw the Buddha expressed his realization in terms of the Four Noble Truths. So if we take this side of specific conditionality or dependent origination, we can see in this the first two Noble Truths. So craving, ignorance, clinging, karmic activities, those are all expressing the second Noble Truth, the truth of the origination of suffering. And then the results like birth, old age, and death, that is expressing the truth of suffering. And then in the second statement, where we have this series of terms, all are just synonyms for Nibbana, we have the third Noble Truth. And then what's not stated here but implied by the third Noble Truth is the path to Nibbana, that is, the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so now the Buddha is reflecting on these two aspects of his realization, and then he thinks to himself, if I were to teach the Dhamma, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. And then he expresses the same idea in verse. He says, enough with teaching the Dhamma that even I found hard to reach, for it will never be perceived by those who live in lust and hate. Those died in lust. That was Venerable Nyanamoli. I might say those excited by lust or aroused by lust, those wrapped in darkness, will never discern this abstruse Dhamma which goes against the stream, the worldly stream, which is subtle, deep, and difficult to see. Very beautifully expressed verses. Okay, then the Buddha, now he's reflecting again and again. Probably he was thinking of this not just once, but throughout the day or maybe several days. And then he says, he comes to the conclusion, considering thus my mind inclined to inaction, or maybe we could rephrase that to dwelling at ease, just living without much activity, taking it easy, living peacefully in the forest, meditating quietly, rather than to teaching the Dhamma. Okay, now, this is the scene I always like when I imagine myself maybe taking up my career as a film producer. We have, like, back in those days, Cecil B. DeMille, was it? You know, the greatest story ever told, 10 Commandments. So here we have the Buddha sitting on the seat of enlightenment. You know, the morning mists have been dispelled as the sun is rising. And now Brahmasahampati, this is like one of the deities in the very high heavenly worlds. He's up there in the heaven, and he's looking down at the Buddha, and he knows what's going on in the Buddha's mind. And so it says, he knew with his mind the thought in my mind, and he considered, the world will be lost, the world will perish, since the mind of the Tathagata, the Arahat, the fully enlightened one, inclines to inaction, to living at ease, rather than to teaching the Dhamma. Then just as quickly as a strong man might extend his flexed arm, his arm in the normal position, he stretches it out, or just as he might pull in his outstretched arm, Brahmasahampati vanished in the Brahma world, this high heavenly realm, and he appeared before me. And then according to the commentary, when Brahmasahampati descends into the human world, he doesn't come just alone, but he's accompanied by thousands and thousands of attendants, other deities from his realm. So this is what makes the filming of the sequence so exciting. Okay, now Brahmasahampati, as we said, he is regarded as one of the high divinities in the Buddhist picture of the universe. But when he comes to the Buddha's presence, he's like a good, pious lay devotee. So he arranges his upper robe on one shoulder. It's considered the polite, respectful way to arrange the robe. Then he puts his hands together in the respectful salutation. This is what they call Anjali in India. So holding his hands up like this towards the Buddha. According to the version of the sutta in the Samyutta Nikāya, he bends down with one knee on the ground, and then he says to the Buddha, he's sort of pleading with the Buddha now. Yeah, he says, cut camera. Okay, he says, Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One teach the Dhamma, let the Sublime One teach the Dhamma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting away, who will perish if they don't get to hear the Dhamma. Then he gives the Buddha this assurance. There will be those who will understand the Dhamma. And then he makes the same appeal in verse. Again, these are very beautiful verses. He says in Magadha is the state of northeast India, roughly corresponding to Bihar, the state of Bihar today. He says, in Magadha there have appeared till now impure teachings devised by those still stained. Open the doors to the deathless. Let them hear the Dhamma that the stainless one has found. Just as one who stands on a mountain peak can see below the people all around, so, O wise one, all-seeing sage, ascend the palace of the Dhamma. Let the sorrowless one survey humankind, this human population, engulfed in sorrow, overcome by birth and old age. And again, now he gets very emotional. He says, arise, O victorious hero, caravan leader, debtless one, and wander in the world. Let the Blessed One teach the Dhamma. There will be those who will understand. Okay, so now Brahmasahampati has delivered his message, and now the Buddha doesn't immediately consent to teach. But after he listens to Brahma's entreaty, then he says, out of compassion for living beings, I surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha. This would be like a special kind of faculty of spiritual vision by which the Buddha can now look out over the world and see into the minds of sentient beings. He can see their potentials, their karmic accumulations, their qualities, faculties, dispositions, and so on. And so then he says, when I surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha, I saw beings with little dust in their eyes and with much dust in their eyes. Those with keen faculties and dull faculties, with good qualities and with bad qualities, those who were easy to teach and hard to teach, and some who dwelt seeing fear and blame in the other world. I think this means those who see the danger even in any kind of rebirth, even in a heavenly realm. And then he illustrates this with, again, it's a very beautiful simile, the simile of a pond of lotus flowers. Just as in a pond of blue, red, or white lotuses, some lotuses that are born and grow in the world thrive underwater and don't rise up from the pond. Other lotuses rise to the surface of the water and remain there. And then there are some other lotuses that grow up in the water and they rise out of the water and they stand clear, unwetted by the water. So too, surveying the world with the eye of the Buddha, I saw beings with these different qualities. And then I replied to Brahmasahampati in verse. This is a famous verse. He says, open for them are the doors to the deathless. Let those with ears, in other words, those who can hear the teaching, now show their faith. Because having faith or trust, this is the quality of mind that makes one open, that enables one to open one's mind in order to listen and try to understand the teaching. Thinking it would be troublesome, Brahma, I did not speak the Dhamma subtle and sublime. Okay, so now the Buddha has agreed to teach the Dhamma, and so Brahma realizes his mission has been accomplished, and so he says, the Blessed One has consented to my request to teach the Dhamma, and then Brahma Sahampati pays homage to the Buddha, even though he's a chief divinity, but he bows down respectfully to the Buddha, circles him, keeping the right side to him, another sign of respect, and then he disappears on the spot. Okay, several interesting questions come up in this story. At least two. I can raise the questions. Let's see if we can find answers for them. One is, probably all of you know the traditional account that's held both in Theravada tradition, Mahayana tradition. They both agree on this, that before the Buddha came into this final existence, many aeons ago, he made a vow to achieve Buddhahood, which turned him into a bodhisattva. Then he practiced developing the excellent qualities, the paramitas or paramis from many lives, giving up his eyes, his arms, his blood, his body, his life, his wives, his children, his kingdoms, all of his possessions, in order to fulfill the paramitas, all for the purpose of achieving Buddhahood, so he could teach the Dhamma to the world. But now he looks out on the world, and then he considers his enlightenment. He thinks, should I teach? Should I not teach? Then he thinks, it's too difficult. Let me just take it easy and live peacefully by myself, not undergoing all of this wearisome frustration and disappointment in trying to teach others. Okay, so that's one question. How do we reconcile this idea of an original vow to achieve Buddhahood, many lives of developing spiritual perfections, all for the purpose of teaching, and now he decides, I won't teach. Okay, that's one problem. Then maybe the other problem or question that comes up is this descent of Mahabrahma. Actually, the two problems are interrelated. What is going on here? Is this to be taken literally, or is this some kind of dramatic representation of an internal debate taking place in the Buddha's own mind? What do you think about these two questions, either individually or both? Any ideas? Okay, Freya, if you can put your...
There's several things.
You can speak and sew at the same time?
Oh, yeah.
Knit, speak and knit as well.
Yeah, I mean, several things come to mind. I mean, on the one hand, you could just say it's literary. This is just a literary convention. It's possible.
What is the literary convention?
Something about Brahma coming down.
Brahma coming down, yeah.
And it's just a nice literary convention of he's debating with himself. Now, as to the Bodhisattva vow, you could even say that's a literary device,
Yeah.
But let's say it's real. Let's just for fun say, yes, he really did that.
Yeah.
Did all these things. But he wasn't enlightened then. He just had this idea of enlightenment. God needs humility because I want to be a Tathagata, a Buddha. But he didn't know what it would be like, right?
Yeah.
So, we can find this in our own lives.
You can find what?
You can find this in your own life. Sometimes when you wish for something or want for something, maybe not as exalted as that, and you finally get it, and you're like, oh, this is what it's like. It's not what I thought it was going to be like. So he finally realizes Nibbana, and he's like, oh, can you teach this?
Yeah.
Look at people.
Yeah.
So he didn't know.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
He was human,
Yeah. Maybe it's a little bit, to put it in somewhat mundane terms, somebody thinks, I want to be, maybe...
I want to be president. It's a hard job.
Yeah, I was thinking of that, but then to put it a little more accessible level, well, maybe for a Buddha it shouldn't be so accessible, but somebody thinks, I want to be a college professor. So then they go through all of the trouble, going to graduate school, maybe getting PhD, writing dissertation, coming up and passing the dissertation exam. Okay, they get the PhD degree, then they go out to the job market for the interviews, the different universities. Finally, one university hires them and says, okay, you start in the fall. Okay, maybe this is the interview is in April or May. Then all over the summer he's thinking, how am I going to teach in the university? They want me to give 3 courses, and the students these days are so intractable, so rebellious, so troublesome. So maybe it's a little bit like that. Not to mention becoming, you get elected president in November, then everything is all glorious up to Inauguration Day. You have the inauguration ball, January 20th? And nowadays there are 5 balls, so you have to attend all 5 of them. And everybody is congratulating you, you're dancing, the cameras are flashing, all the celebrities are coming. Then the ball is over, you go to the White House, sleep. The next day you wake up and you're president, and one group of advisors saying, Afghanistan, what are we going to do? Taliban, suicide bomb is here. President Karzai there. His brother making this trouble. Iraq. These people saying, get out of Iraq, get out. These people are saying, you have to stay in. Then there is the healthcare issue, climate bill, jobs bill, economic problems. Oh my heavens, and I have 4 more years of this. It's just the first day. Yeah, okay. But those are good ideas. Yeah.
I'm actually in complete agreement with Trey's comment. I just want to present it.
Okay. Maybe speak a little more loudly. Yeah.
I should push something.
No, it's working, but okay.
My understanding, or my current misunderstanding, is that on the night of his enlightenment, the Buddha went through a complete psychological tear down and break up and rebuilding. And that is a process that is not open to cognitive understanding. The vow was made in the same way that you said, you want to be this, you want to be that, you want to be this, you want to be that. And that is a cognitive process about what one imagines. But the reorientation that I currently believe occurs during such an epiphany, if I may, is not expressible by definition.
Yeah.
And so that could account for taking a while to integrate. And during that integration period, the cognitive part starts coming back and says, oh yes, this is what I'm preparing for. And then it can be dealt with that way. So moving on to the Brahma Sahampati appearance, I would have had a different opinion years ago. My current opinion is that to ask whether this is a literary device or not asks me to have an opinion about cosmology, which is not what my practice is.
You mean your practice is not concerned with whether...
I have no answer to those questions, nor are they the ones that concern me.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm just asking, how are we to understand, even though it might not concern you,
Both ways.
Yeah, I'm still asking, how are we to understand the appearance of Brahma Sahampati here?
It is, if I may,
Yeah.
Both may be true, and I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see if Susie has something to add.
I constantly bring my early upbringing with me, but I think of the book, St. Thomas's Dark Night of the Soul.
St. John of the Cross?
St. John of the Cross,
Yeah.
excuse me. St. Thomas, the Dark Night of the Soul, which parallels the having to let go. The first dark night is letting go of material things, and the second dark night is letting go of thought and opinion.
Yeah.
And they culminate in this awakening idea.
Yeah.
It's similar. But I also was thinking the famous last temptation of Christ idea. Just this is the last threshold to break through. That's a different image in that, but the last threshold of finally achieving good understanding what it actually means, as Andre said, which to me was like, oh yeah, I get it. Understanding what it really means and what it will entail, and then making that last effort.
Yeah.
But in the second, is Brahma an internal debate? If we're just playing around here with ideas, the jihad in the Muslim tradition, the true jihad is the conflict within oneself.
Yeah.
And it's a similar idea again in Christianity and with St. Teresa's interior castle of going inward. And it feels very much to me like it's an internal debate. I mean, I vote on that side.
Yeah.
That it's
Okay, so you wouldn't take it literally.
I don't take it literally,
Okay.
but although I take it absolutely that it's going on inside.
Okay. What's actually interesting, you mentioned the last temptation. Okay, in this passage we have the Buddha on his own inclining not to teach, and Brahma comes to the Buddha to persuade him to teach. Now there's a passage that comes in the Ariyapariyesana Sutta. Yeah, please turn off cell phones, otherwise I have to reshoot many scenes. Okay, there's a passage that comes in the Ariyapariyesana Sutta where the Buddha is speaking to Ananda, and he's speaking about an incident that took place right after his enlightenment. It doesn't come in other suttas. In this passage, as the Buddha relates it, he says after his enlightenment, Mara came to him and said, "It's enough, Lord, that you've gotten enlightenment. Don't teach the Dhamma. Just pass into final nirvana." And then at that point the Buddha says, stop Mara. I will not pass into parinibbana, into final nirvana, until I have monk, nun, male lay followers and female lay followers who have learned my Dhamma well, who have achieved attainment in it, who are able to expound it, disclose it, teach it to others, and spread it widely through the world. And here, instead of Brahma being the sort of devotee pleading with the Buddha, we have Mara being the obstructionist, trying to create, in a way, supporting that temptation not to teach. Anybody else here have some? you're wrong. You usually have some ideas.
Yeah, teach us that. It's like the little devil and the little angel on the shoulder.
Yeah, I remember it was in the cartoons that we used to see as kids. Is it Pluto the dog? Is that Mickey Mouse's dog?
That's Mickey Mouse. Yes.
Pluto. Mickey Mouse gives some instruction to Pluto, like, don't chew on the furniture or something like that. Then the two little Plutos come on his shoulder. One is like with the wings and the halo and says, follow your master, don't chew on the furniture, you'll be a good dog. Then on the other shoulder there's a little version of Pluto with the horns and long tail. And he says, don't listen to that guy. Chew on the furniture, doesn't matter. It's fun. Okay.
What's confusing to me is that there seems to be like an online debate, because the way I understand is that the Buddha is omniscient, so wouldn't he already know if there are beings that are capable of being taught? You know what I mean?
Wait, I didn't quite catch what you... We put the... okay.
He ends up teaching to the ascetics that he was practicing with. So wouldn't he already know through his wisdom that there are beings that are ripe for being taught? It seems that Brahma coming to teach him kind of discredits his enlightenment, because, for one, I didn't think that Deva is still called samsara were capable of understanding a life being's mind. And I thought he would already have knowledge of that without being stuck in samsara needing to tell him that there are beings that are ripe. So what do you think about that?
Speaking of Buddha's omniscience,
yeah.
Why wouldn't he already know that there were beings who, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Why would he already know that there are beings out there who could be taught?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know the answer to this, but maybe somebody have some ideas about this. Yeah, Drea?
Relating back to what I said earlier, I think a lot of it is a literary device.
Yeah.
A lot of the canon is redacted. You can't necessarily read it literally. Okay? They got the monks after the Buddha's death they got Ananda to basically spout out everything he remembered that the Buddha said, along with everybody else's collective memory, and they realized we better write it down. And there were a lot of redactors. There's a lot of different versions even of the Pali Canon. And people wrote in different things. And it's also the custom in all cosmological literature of any tradition, to have these literary expositions. Whether it could be an angel visiting, Saint Teresa, or whatever. It's very common stuff. It is a good way to explain the struggle within ourselves or within oneself. That's just my opinion. I think you have to look at things a little critically and not disingenuously.
Maybe Bowie wants to say something. Good.
My answer is the question is that is it possible because the vow of Bodhisattva the Buddha made in the past still had the momentum, just like these five aggregates, that continues to exist even after his enlightenment. So if the Buddha stopped at the moment of his enlightenment about his Bodhisattva vow, then he wouldn't have had the comfort. So, in other words, for another person who had never made a Bodhisattva vow in the past, the person, if enlightened, wouldn't have the comfort that Buddha had.
Yeah. So you say a person who hadn't made the Bodhisattva vow might have had that conflict.
Yeah, because that continued, that seed, that if we put it in that term, that seed continued to exist. He has to eradicate that seed. It's just like there's the remaining momentum of that vow.
you're asking, does that vow continue to have its momentum at the time of the enlightenment? Okay, now what's interesting actually, there's like several conflicting or maybe incompatible strands even within the early texts. First, we don't find in the very early canon, the Nikayas, any statement that the Buddha in a past life made the Bodhisattva vow and then practiced paramitas over many lives to become a Buddha. This we start to find, it probably already comes in before the rise of Mahayana Buddhism, but in the period where maybe over several generations after the Buddha's passing away. So within the Pali tradition, the earliest texts that speak about that Bodhisattva vow would be texts like Buddhavamsa, Charya Pitaka, which maybe date from about even 3rd century, 2nd century BC. So on the one hand, we don't find explicit mention of a bodhisattva vow and the fulfillment of perfections. But now on the other hand, there are some texts which suggest, again, this could be literary device, that the Buddha, before his enlightenment, was already destined to become a world teacher. Like, okay, one text is in the Sutta Nipata. I think it comes in Mahavagga. It could be, what's the name of the sutta? Nalaka Sutta. The Nalaka Sutta in the Sutta Nipata, where it begins with the devas, the deities, are singing and joyful, and there is a sage, a rishi, his name is Asita, who is able to see the devas singing and dancing, and then he asks them, why are you so happy? Why are you so joyful? And then he replies, we are joyful because the Bodhisattva has been born into the world for the welfare and happiness of the world. You know, so this is suggesting already that he's destined to become a teacher of the Dhamma in the world. So in that case, then the whole struggle, should I teach or should I not teach? It's already decided. The outcome is already determined. But we could say maybe this Nalaka Sutta, that section, can be a later literary creation. Apparently so. But there is another sutta, it comes in Anguttara Nikāya, where the Buddha is speaking about 5 dreams that he had before his enlightenment, while he was still a bodhisattva. And at least several of these dreams indicate that he is going to become a teacher. Like he says that he has a dream which signifies that he's going to have many disciples, both monastic and lay disciples. So if he had the dream before his enlightenment, and that dream was the kind of foresign of what will take place after the enlightenment, then it's suggesting that he was already sort of predetermined to be a teacher. So there are these conflicting strands. And so, depending on which strand one wants to pick up, one could lean towards either position. Like I know some people who come to Buddhism, these would be people who come from, I might say, the pragmatic, scientific, empirical, realistic angle. They say the stuff about bodhisattva vows, past life accumulations of paramitas, Brahma Sahampati coming down to plead with the Buddha, all literary embellishments. When the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he really wasn't certain whether he was going to be a teacher or not. When he was reflecting, should I teach or not, there was a real internal struggle. when he said, my mind inclined to inaction rather than to teaching. He really decided not to teach, but then he had second thoughts about this. And then when his reflection on the world came up, then that stimulated his compassion, and then he decided to teach. All of the rest is just sort of icing on the cake, but this is the flour that makes up the substance of the cake. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. But there's another way to look at it. Okay, now I'm really speaking with my own voice. Okay, Brahmasahampati, maybe the name is fictitious. Maybe the exact way this occurred is a little bit of a literary embellishment. But why should we assume, like, this is the only realm of existence and that there are not beings on other realms? Like, you know, you have a computer here. Can you check to see whether I got any emails? Emails, how can you get emails? Flying through the air? Or you're getting your telephone call, right? There's no wire. How is that telephone message getting to your telephone and causing it to ring? And now there are people at NASA who are getting messages coming from spacecraft that are flying past the moon, Jupiter, Saturn, other planets. You tell that to somebody, maybe we go to Australia, some of the Aboriginal, well, maybe they will accept it, but they would have less trouble with it. Let us say we're speaking to a 18th century rationalist. And then he'll say to you, you know, a European rationalist from the 18th century, he'll say to you, what kind of nonsense are you speaking? What have you been smoking? So, you know, from this hard rationalist point of view, like all of this is just nonsense, imagination. But we know, at least we have some idea how electronic equipment work, and so we could say this is possible, this is real. And so by the same token, as a Buddhist, I would say that there are other realms of existence, and just as your relatives and friends far away can send you emails and telephone calls to wherever you are in the Kuan Yin Hall today, so beings from other realms can tune in to what the Buddha is doing and appear to him, like sending him an email message, or, you know, when they do an interview with somebody, you know, the television broadcaster is in New York, but we're speaking to the great authority on healthcare who's in his office in Washington, D.C., and then they have this video screen, and then they're interviewing him on the video screen. Wireless, no less. And so, you know, Brahmasahampati is, maybe he's not literally coming down to the human world to speak to the Buddha, but he's addressing him through a video conference, teleconference, from the Brahma world. And even if it's not one individual, but it could be like whole groups of deities, divine beings, pleading with the Buddha, because now the Buddha is one through his attainment who's superior to the devas, and so they're pleading with him to teach. And some ask, how could the Buddha, with his power of knowledge, omniscience, knowledge of things in the world, not already know whether there are beings who can understand or not? Again, there are several ways to look at this. One way is to say, this is a literary device which makes the dramatic, it sort of magnifies the dramatic impact when you have the Buddha saying, I won't teach. Then you have Brahma come down and plead with him to teach. Especially if you're teaching to like an Indian audience, and your Indian audience members have been devotees of Brahma, saying Brahma is God, He is the creator. He's the one we make offerings to, sacrifices to. And now they hear Brahma has come to appeal to the Buddha, ask the Buddha to teach. That Brahma bows down to the Buddha and extends his hands in Anjali. So the Buddha is superior to Brahma. So why should we worship Brahma? We should worship the Buddha. So it has that dramatic impact, also propagational impact. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is another way that I see it. Actually, two ways I could see it. One is that in order for the Buddha to make that decision to teach, first he has to arouse his compassion. And maybe at that point, that inner change hasn't come within him. He's still sort of, when he does his initial reflection, he's still sort of under the impact of the realization of the Four Noble Truths and the deathless Nibbana. And so the mind hasn't yet sort of the dust of the realization hasn't, or not dust, but maybe these will be the sparkles of the realization. You know, the fireworks still haven't stopped. You know, the fireworks, the Roman candles, the rockets, multicolored streams of light. The firework displays are still going on. And so he's not yet really able to see clearly out into the world and to really read the potentials of the living beings. And it's until he can read the potentials of living beings, his compassion won't arise. So that's one way to look at it. The other way that I would look at it is that, again, this is a kind of dramatic effect. What we see in paragraph 19 shows that what I call the culmination of the movement of ascent. I see like two movements involved in the Buddha's career or in any kind of spiritual career. One is what I call the movement of ascent, which is moving from the lower level to the higher level. Then comes the movement of descent, where after reaching the peak of realization attainment, one re-engages with the world. And this takes place in many different spiritual traditions in different ways, at many different levels. So in order to, before one begins the movement of descent, one first reaches the peak of the movement of ascent. And on reaching that peak of the movement of that ascending movement, the purpose is to show that it leads to a kind of complete detachment and a complete, separation from all the entire conditioned world. And now, if the Buddha were on his own to decide, let me go out and teach, there might be those who will be standing on the sidelines saying, that ambitious son of a bitch wants to set himself up as a teacher. He wants to, surround himself with disciples and stand out as, big man on campus, big man on the spiritual scene. So to avoid that kind of criticism, you have to have the Buddha completely detached. Should I teach or not? Too much trouble. But then to show that impulse that starts the movement of descent comes not from the Buddha himself, no kind of ambition to set himself up as a teacher, but it's Brahma representing the whole world, saying, please come down and teach us. So maybe that will work. These are just different possibilities. Anybody else have any ideas? Please, yeah.
This stage, I see it as a review stage. As a review stage.
Review stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
When he reached the enlightenment, and as other stages to get to enlightenment, there are steps of review at each stage. So I see this as kind of the final review, and as you say, there's still a little bit of dust or a little bit of.
It's not dust, because dust usually means like defilement.
Not dust, but.
I call it the fireworks displays. The fireworks are still going.
Gold dust.
Yeah.
Yes. But there is also, in addition, I can relate to your idea of detachment, and I thought that was getting completely detached before this level. There is that stage of review is also a stage of integration.
That's a very good point. Very good point. Yeah.
And part of that integration is also, I think, I read it as the realization of free will, and there's a crossroad there. Choices can be made.
Yeah.
So that's how I read it. Like there is free will and choice, and it's also the choice to ascend and to go back in the relative world.
Yeah.
That's a choice.
Yeah.
There's a new path in the relative world.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning of that path.
Yeah.
So it's not the end of the world, in other words.
Yeah. Those are very good points. Yeah. So paragraph 19 can show that there's still this integration taking place. And then also that decision to teach, whether to teach or not, again, it shows that it's a free will. It's not just the working out. I think I'm losing the.
It's actually on, but it's not as sensitive to your ear, I think, as it usually is. We can hear it.
You can hear it well. Okay. To show that this decision to teach is not simply the working out of a vow that might have been made a long, long time ago, but it's a free and compassionate choice that the Buddha makes right in the here and now.
I'm paralleling this again, but the idea of what I really like about this is if it's hard for me, imagine how hard it will be for others, or something that you sort of put in there. And I get an image, again, Christian, of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Somebody else do this work, take this cup. But the idea of giving us hope that it is going to be hard.
Yeah.
And that the doubt that comes for all of us even came to the Buddha.
Yeah.
So don't be discouraged. If it was hard for him, it will be hard, but continue anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point too. One thing about this incident here is that it provides a kind of model for what continues in several Buddhist traditions, and that is that when a monk is invited to give a discourse, this takes place in the Thai tradition, I don't recall it in Sri Lanka, but they'll have a member of a lay person in the audience is given the special task of coming up from the audience in front of the monk, and then he recites some verses. I think they're in Pali, but I don't know the verse since I'm not from the Thai tradition. But in effect it says, just as Brahma Sahampati came to the Buddha and requested him to teach, so we, your audience here, stand before you with our hands joined in Anjali, in this respectful position, and request you to continue turning the wheel of Dhamma that the blessed Buddha has set in motion. And I think in the Chinese tradition also this is done. I remember when I was in the city of 10,000 Buddhas, this is in California, Ukiah, California, they recited some verse like that. Do they do that in Taiwan? Sometimes they do that. Okay, let me just look at the questions from the internet. He says, looking at the discussions we are having and the various forms of Buddhism in the world, it seems the Buddha created more confusion by deciding to teach. Could you comment on this? The only comment I'll make is that even though he might have created some confusion, if he didn't decide to teach, then we wouldn't have the Dhamma, or at least a well-established Dhamma, and so we'd still be all wallowing in the darkness of delusion. So we should be thankful that he taught. Okay, second question. The Buddha thinks it would be wearisome and troublesome to teach. I thought after enlightenment, one wouldn't have to deal with these emotions. Actually, that's a good point, that why should the Buddha think this is going to be wearisome and troublesome to me? If he were really compassionate, he should think, it doesn't matter if I have to go through a lot of physical exertion to teach and people don't understand, at least maybe there'll be a few who'll understand. And so he shouldn't be concerned with the weariness and troubles that he'll meet. But again, what I would say is that this is probably, again, part of the literary embellishment to give some reason for the Buddha to initially decide not to teach. He has to think it's wearisome and troublesome. And then when he decides not to teach, then Brahma can come and plead with him to teach. If the Buddha doesn't think it'll be wearying and troublesome, then he'll just jump right at the opportunity to teach. Then, there's no struggle with the choice, no opportunity for Brahma to appear, and that great literary scene vanishes, and my career as a filmmaker comes to an end. Okay, third question. Why couldn't the Buddha, after attaining the supreme enlightenment, see what Brahma Sahampati saw? Probably what he means is, why couldn't he see that there would be beings who would be able to understand? Again, I say that probably he could see this, but if that was said explicitly, then we lose that whole dramatic incident. So, logic triumphs over, in that case, logic or what's reasonable would triumph over the grandeur of the literary scene. Did you have some comment to make?
Yes.
Okay, please take the microphone.
Because the Buddha had enlightenment, would that be something that is necessary for even himself to process before he could properly teach? In other words, it's kind of like having a carpet pulled out from under you. So
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think it connects with the point that... What is your name again? Abra. Like abracadabra, is that correct? Okay, Abra made about integration. So he had to integrate his realization. But actually, in some accounts of the Enlightenment, or let's say the narrative of the Buddha's life, what is said is that immediately after his enlightenment, he spent, in some versions it's 4 weeks, in other versions it's 7 weeks, exploring the Dhamma from different angles, which we could say is the process of integration, or say widening the range. Like the enlightenment itself would be like a sort of straight, direct breakthrough to the essential realization. Excuse me? Yeah. But now, in what follows, he doesn't have to realize anything new, but it's sort of expanding the range of that to take in more and more aspects of reality in the light of that enlightenment.
Yeah,
So that...
in order for to change his behaviors and
No.
Because of his new insight.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it would take years, though I would say that this is what was taking place in that 4-week to 7-week period, a kind of 4-week to 7-week period, a kind of sort of getting familiar with the terrain of enlightenment, and now getting familiar with what it's like to be a living being without greed, hatred, delusion, without any of the kilesas, the defilements, or asavas. Yeah, but I wouldn't think it would take years to get used to that. I say for somebody with a mind as well developed as the Buddha.
Right, yeah, he didn't start from scratch.
Yeah. Okay, then somebody else was raising the hand on this side. I think it was Drea. You could take the microphone.
Comment and kind of a question to you as to when he talks about it would be wearisome. He speaks a few times in the various Nikāyas. There are sections where he says, "Oh, that would be a weariness to me. People not understanding, that would be a weariness. That would be a weariness. I'd rather just sit in the pleasant abiding now. There are times when it is right to go to the Tathagata. Ananda always knew this is not a good time. No, this is a good time to go see him now." So it's just my thoughts. I think you can be enlightened, but you're still human. Things can be wearisome. You just get attached to it. You get to follow and cling on to it. I think, these are the things you translated. So we're talking about in the Digha Nikāya, the Majjhima Nikāya, in the Anguttara, the Samyutta, there are sections where he says, "But this is a weariness to me. And this is long-lasting enlightenment. If you want, I'll have to go look them up." Which is not easy. There are a few times when he says that.
I'll have to check whether there are other.
I'm not saying they're all in every single, but there's a few times when he says this would be a weariness.
I'll have to check whether there are other incidents.
I'll go look and I'll do the page by page in these few books.
Yeah.
And, so, sure, why not?
I think, maybe because Ananda was the Buddha's personal attendant, so he would say, this isn't the right time to go see the Tathagata. That would be...
I'm just saying differently, just using the logic, like, sometimes he says this here.
Yeah.
And then, Ananda always do the right time, so that kind of speaks.
So there would be times when the Buddha is sitting in meditation, then you wouldn't go and sort of pull him out.
He's pleasant abiding here and now.
Yeah, that means...
And it's a way to abide pleasantly here and now.
Yeah.
Not just a tool.
Yeah.
But it's a nice way to hang out, basically. And, also in terms of why, the Buddha's omniscience, there's some, I forget which book it's in, but he's talking about omniscience, and he basically explains, I have the divine eye, I can do all these things, but I have to do it. He has to affirmatively take action to see what's going on. He wasn't looking. That's why he wasn't at that point looking.
Yeah.
But it's not just I think it's sort of not like everybody's just hitting him, oh my God, all this stuff.
Yeah.
You affirmatively choose to, let's see what they're doing in the day below.
Yeah.
What's happening in the world? Where did you go after you died and where you were born? And what was the reason? He's got to actively make a choice to do it.
Yeah, this is the question of the omniscience of the Buddha. And in the early texts, the Nikāyas, that's worrying and troublesome for me. In the early texts, we don't find an explicit statement about the omniscience of the Buddha. And sometimes the Buddha has to attend to something specifically in order to take action on it. So this is the way the commentary deals with this issue of, is the Buddha omniscient? And what it says is that the Buddha is not omniscient in the sense that he can know everything that is all at once, know everything that is happening everywhere in the world and know every fact about the world. But what's true is that what the Buddha's omniscience consists in is the ability to know whatever he wants to know. But in order to know a particular fact or situation, he has to turn his mind to it.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take the lunch break now, and then we could come back about 12 noon and continue this discussion. I was actually going to finish the Sutta today, but I think this is an interesting discussion, and for me it's interesting to get other points of view on it, because, I just know what the text says, so it's interesting to get other people's points of view. And I should just mention before we close, what the commentary says, because the commentary also deals with this passage. And it says that there are two reasons why the Buddha hesitates here and doesn't immediately make the decision to teach on his own. One is to inspire in people who are going to read this, the idea to inspire respect for the Dhamma. Because if the Buddha just goes out and starts teaching, then people will take that the Dhamma is something which is very easy, very accessible, very, it's like when you see a book on sale, 99 cents, you're not interested in buying it, or maybe a dress on sale or a suit, 99 cents. You think it's just cheap, worthless article of clothing. But if the same dress is going for $900, $999, you think, wow, that must be a very fancy dress, and then you want to buy it. And so when the Buddha decides, I'm not going to teach, then finally he decides, okay, I'll teach. Then one thinks the Dhamma is very precious, very hard to encounter. I'd better take full advantage of it while I have the opportunity. So that's one reason. The other reason the Buddha first refuses to teach, he knows that if I refuse to teach, Brahma is going to come down and request me to teach. And since people outside, this is in India, venerate Brahma, when they learn that Brahma has asked me to teach, then they will know that my teaching is something that even the great deity Brahma venerates, and so they'll show extra respect to the teaching. So that is the Pali commentary. How the commentary knows this, I don't know, but they probably the commentators also just use their reflection to come to that. We don't see anybody in the suttas come to the Buddha and says, Buddha, if you are so compassionate, why did you hesitate to teach? Okay, so we'll end with sharing the merits with the Devas, the Bhuttas, with Brahma Sahampati, if he's still in this universe, and with all the people in the world, wishing them to be well, happy, free from harm and suffering. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadhaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupi arupi cha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, we do 3 half hours.